Dia Dweets Achara. Hello, my friends, and thank you for joining me today for the first chapter of The Changeling's Call. This is a book that I wrote in kind of a traditional Irish style fairy lore. So without further ado, with a little further ado, I'm wearing my medieval style dress, but my hair does not match the style at all. So let me know in the comments if you think I should do a wig or just like a fabric hair covering for next time. Okay. This is dedicated to Cambria, Callahan, and Elizabeth. The quote is by Oscar Wilde: "If you are not too long, I will wait here for you all my life." And chapter 1 is called The Golden Princess. Orla's cries shattered the peace for the 5th time that night. Aoife paced the flagstone floor of the small cottage and dolefully regretted the baby's name choice. Orla meant something like Golden Princess, and this red, wretched, wailing child was proving to be as hard to please as if she had been born royal and accustomed to fine silk linens and every other luxury. Aoife and Connor had been married nearly 3 years and had wanted this child with all their hearts. Connor was so overjoyed to be a father, he had the energy of 5 men in the months leading up to her birth. In fact, he was the one who had insisted on the name, calling her his dear princess more often than Orla. Aoife was a small but pretty woman with dark brown hair and large expressive eyes, dainty hands and feet, and a tendency to blush when happy or excited, which she often was. Connor was a broad-shouldered bear of a man who dwarfed his wife, but he was gentle and good-humored. Only Aoife knew that he preferred music over hunting and fishing, because he secretly hated to kill even the smallest creature. His eyes were blue, but his hair was also dark, with no gray in his thick beard, so it came as no surprise that the child was born with a crop of soft, dark brown curls. "She's no golden princess, McGraw. She'll likely be as dark-haired a girl as I." But Connor insisted, saying that the gold was describing her worth and not her looks. If Aoife's mother was still alive, she might have had some help. She might have learned the tricks of soothing a colicky babe, or had someone to take over and give her a good night's rest. But as it was, Connor had built their cottage a fair half-mile from the outskirts of Ballyshannon, because he wanted to claim a large and fertile bit of land for their sheep and crop of oats and potatoes. Her nearest friend was nearly 2 miles away, and she hadn't had the energy to make the trip since Orla was born. And so here Aoife was, 10 days after the harrowing birth, with a baby who had been fitful and impossible to please. The days were starting to blur together, and because she was getting by on an hour or 2 of sleep at a time, and she felt she was starting to go mad. She loved her daughter dearly, but dark thoughts were beginning to come unbidden into her mind. She thought of how lovely her life with Connor had been before they had a child. What madness had possessed them to change anything at all? Humming and rocking Orla was doing absolutely nothing to quell the plaintive cries that Connor somehow slept through. Aoife changed the nearly dry nappy and then offered her breast, but after a minute or 2, the babe unlatched herself and began a new bout of crying. Something inside Aoife snapped. Her irritation and hopelessness turned to anger. She imagined smothering the child until the noise stopped forever. This caused a small twinge of fear to stab through the numbness, and she was stirred to action. She had to keep the child safe, yes, just for a little while. The fragments of thoughts flitted through her mind. They were hers and not hers. She suddenly noticed a sleek black mouse on the threshold. It seemed to hold her eyes for a moment, then slipped under the door. She didn't think about this, but inexplicably felt stirred to action. Quickly and mechanically, she fetched a thick blanket and wrapped Orla tightly. Her bare feet crossed the distance to the door before she realized she was walking. She held the screaming bundle close to her and stepped out into the otherworldly glow of a full moon. It was spring, but the air was still freezing cold, and her breath came in wisps of vapor before her. Without thinking, she walked to the edge of the clearing where the woods began, where stood an old and gnarled hawthorn tree. In the crook between 2 branches, she placed Orla, who was squirming so much she had already freed one arm and was working the other one loose, all while screaming zealously. Aoife vaguely wondered how she hadn't woken the whole town of Ballyshannon, even as far away as it was. She knelt to give her a kiss, but instead whispered, "Slan Banfrancha." And with that farewell, she turned and walked back into the cottage, climbed into bed beside Connor, and fell into a deep sleep. Several hours later, Aoife awoke with a panic. having a faint recollection of a terrible and confusing dream. Her shirt front was wet and cold with milk, and her breast felt heavy and full. She then noticed how perfectly still and silent the dark house was. Her panic intensified when she remembered what she had done. This time she did not bother with shoes or cloak, but ran, hair streaming wildly and face ugly with fear, out of the cottage and back toward the hawthorn tree. As soon as she saw Orla's empty blanket, a pain like she'd never felt gripped her heart and knotted her stomach. Her beautiful baby that she'd wished for years, that she fought so hard to bring into this world, was gone. She sank to her knees on the cold, wet grass, her cry of grief strangled in her throat as her eyes filled with tears. But through her blurred vision, she noticed something move in the tall grass. Quickly wiping her tears, she leaned toward it and saw two little hands through the grass. Thank God! There she was, her dark blue newborn eyes calm and her expression content. She had on only her nappy and her thin swaddling blanket, and yet she didn't shiver with cold or complain that she had missed at least one feeding. Ife snatched her up, held her close to her chest, and sobbed with relief. Dawn was breaking, and she entered the cottage just as Connor was starting to stir. She would never tell him what she had done. When he happily remarked later that Orla had suddenly ceased her constant fretting, Ife simply said that it was common for newborns to get colicky in the second week of life, and now that it had passed, Orla was really a very good baby. In fact, she was like another child entirely. That's the end of chapter 1. Thank you for reading with me, and I'll see you next time.